Hi everyone, good afternoon. We're here again for another Hatton's Rolling Stock Profile, showing you some of the most famous vehicles that were used on the UK railway network and some of the models that have inspired them as well. Today, I thought we'd have a look at something a little bit different. Many of you have already seen most of the locomotives out there, especially in model form and in real life, and know quite a lot about them. But it's surprising just how many of you have certainly spoken to me and others from the Hatton's team saying they don't actually know much about the rolling stock that they hauled. So I thought I'd start at the place that's got to be the most important coach in UK railway history, the British Railways Mark I. It was the first standardised coach for the whole of Britain for every single operator as soon as they came under British Railways in 1948. Thousands and thousands of them were built, and there's still many of them operating in many different liveries today. So we'll take a little bit of a closer look at the history. If you've got any questions regarding the coaches, ask them in the chat and I'll answer the questions as we go through the stream. And also we'll be looking at some of the models that have been produced right from the 1950s up until the current day. I will just sort a quick technical issue and then we'll get started. So the big four railway companies were formed into British Railways in 1948. Now, the slight problem with so many different companies coming together, not only the big four, but the companies that had come before them too, meant there were many different types of coaches in use across the network. Lots of designs that had suddenly become non-standard for having several different parts, several different ways of operating, and some of them, especially the elder vehicles, were actually becoming quite unsafe. So the newly formed British Railways design team came up with a design that incorporated all the best features of some of the latest coaches to have come out of those big four railway companies. So we're looking at the Great Western Hawksworth coaches, the Southern Railway Bullied vehicles, the LNER Thompson coaches, and the LMS period free and porthole vehicles that had been built only a couple of years before the nationalisation in 1948. Until about 1951 or so, the works were still churning out the big four designs, but building them by BR until the Mark I arrived. As you can guess by the name, it was the first standardised coach out there, and this was introduced initially in a livery called Plum and Spilt Milk, which was a trial livery, but quickly defining itself in this brand new livery of Carmine and Cream, which again really symbolised the evolution and development of British Railways as its own company with its brand new colour scheme that you see here. The main positive about these coaches is they were, for the first time, a really standardised design. So you have your 63-foot length vehicles. You had one bogie type at the time, which was the BR number 1 bogie, again, starting off with number 1. And these came into service, the first vehicles in 1951, mainly the corridor vehicles, so your compartments and your brake compartments as well. And they were used on some of the main expresses running on all four of the former Big Four railway company networks. Suddenly, this was the coach to go for. BR knew that it was onto something good, and they decided to replace pretty much everything else in the fleet with Mark I coaches. And they were built right up until 1963 in many different designs, some of which I'll cover shortly for you. Now, they were built and continually developed as well during the development cycle. So lots of different changes happened to them over the years. They were initially built in some formations and then new styles were made, such as the second open and tourist second open coaches. Then they had the advent of electric train heating to replace the steam heating. You have different facilities inside. You had different bogies, such as the Commonwealth bogie and later the BR number 4 bogie, which again allowed for faster speed and better braking systems too. But by the early 1960s, these coaches had really come into their own, mainly being used by this time in BR's maroon livery, which had established for its coaching stock fleet. However, some of the regions were given their own independence, with the Southern region painting its Mark I coaches in the Southern green livery, similar to the livery carried by the Bullied coaches right at the end of the Southern Railway, and the Great Western was allowed to return to its classic chocolate and cream livery, which had been carried by coaches in the west of England for quite some time before. So even though it was quite a modern design at this stage, they were able to hark back to those original designs. Speaking of the designs, let's take a little bit of a look at some of the different vehicles we've got in front of us here now. And you'll see that even for a standard design, they did have quite a lot of variation within there. So we've got the CK, which is the composite corridor represented in N gauge here. Now that allowed for both first and second class compartment seating, which was great to have a little bit of first class on your train, but maybe not for the larger trains, where you had your specific first vehicle. You have the TSO that we mentioned, which was your standard open coach, which had 2 seats of 4 either side with a table going down the coach with a central aisle. Again, we've got another CK there represented by a Hornby model. You can see that in the original style Carmine and Cream livery. We've got a full brake, which was used for moving around mail, luggage, mainly attached to the back of express trains in the initial period, and that's represented by a Lima model. Heading over to Bachmann's buffet coach, this is the smaller type of the buffet vehicle, and you're really getting a flavour here of just how many different types we have got. So you've got the buffet vehicle, you've got another open coach there, you have a second corridor, which was purely a compartment coach, and then you have a brake second corridor as well, with space for the guards van in there. And finally, we've got one of the full first coaches in N gauge at the end. And I'll show you some pictures as well, just of some of the types we've not got covered here. This is a full griddle car, which actually had cooking facilities on board, so could make complete meals. And this is one of the similar cars there with the kitchen that you can see on the right-hand side in the BR blue-grey livery. Now, this was the livery that they came into in the 1970s when BR again came into its corporate colour scheme, invented in 1964, I believe. So the coaches were painted quite quickly after that. This lasted right through until the 1980s. And again, alongside the developments of the Mark II and the Mark III coaches, which were developments of these particular vehicles. Coming into a more modern scheme, the Mark I's still had their place on the network, used a little bit less on the express services now, but certainly on some of the quieter secondary routes, especially in Scotland and in the south and west of England, mainly on the little byways and the smaller lines, but still had the purpose, still thousands of them remaining in traffic into the 1980s. Some of them were modified at this time and fitted out with full first class interiors to be used on special charter trains. The style of the compartments had not aged too well, shall we say. It had quickly become a classic, but at the same time, a lot of people did start enjoying that to indulge, shall we say, in the luxury style compartments and enjoy that on a first class train that we see here heading into Wales. But this is where the Mark I story started to fall down a little bit. There had been offshoots of the design made into the 1960s, mainly electric multiple units and postal vehicles. But even that great crashworthiness from the 1950s was starting to get a little bit, shall we say, long in the tooth. With the Mark IIs and Mark IIIs coming through, you really had got to the stage where the crashworthiness was improving with every single design. Heading into the 1990s, these coaches were approaching 30 to 40 years old, and that was about their life expectancy. They still had a lot of the original features on there, and they had seen works attention, but they were starting to get quite tired. And this was the point where mass withdrawals took place. However, many of them headed into preservation, and you can still see them on many different preserved railways today. The last vehicles were withdrawn from mainline service in the early 2000s, one of the restaurant cars being used by Anglia Railways on its express services up until, I believe, 2001 was the last date for a Mark I in normal passenger service. But you can still see hundreds and hundreds of them out there today on preserved railways across the country and being used on rail tours right into 2020. Most of you will be familiar with the Jacobite steam service that operates on the West Highland Railway. And this is just one example of the Mark 1s still plying their trade, almost twice the length of the life expectancy. So, as you can imagine, with a coach that fills such a huge place in the UK railway scene, models came out very, very quickly indeed of the Mark 1 coach. An SLD 51, I will start with one of your favourites with the BR Maroon there, and this is the Hornby 00 model. So you've got the tinplate sides on there. This is from the late 1950s, and even for its time, it still does have quite a little bit of detail on there too. Both Hornby and Lima then made their own variations of the coaches in the 1970s and 1980s. Neither of these are available now in this condition, but you can get them quite regularly on our pre-owned department in a variety of liveries. Lima also made an N-gauge model that you can see here. In the early 2000s, Bachmann tooled up a completely new Mark 1 coach that you can see right here in front of me. This has a lot of detail and really brought the models into the 21st century. This was followed by Hornby's version, which has been out now for a couple of years and is available in either railroad or full decoration spec too. So you've got an option of either plastic wheels and a little bit of decoration, or you can really go to town on some of the others. And finally, at the end, we have the Graham Farish Mark 1 in N-gauge. And not missing out the O-gauge model either. Helgen have provided these over the last 10 years in a variety of guises. I've got the full brake in BR green right here. And there is a Dapol model coming through too. So whichever scale you're in, you can have a Mark 1 for your layout. And this is only a selection of the Mark 1s that have been made over the years. There's almost as many as the real life coaches that have come out there too. And again, it just shows you the variety in the different vehicles. Even for a standard design, you've got many different window layouts, different roof fittings, deliveries right through from the 1950s into the 1960s, 1980s, 1990s, and even through to the rail tour colours today. If you've ever travelled on a Mark 1, if you've ever seen one around and about, you'll no doubt be familiar with the iconic style inside as well of the comfy compartments that you can see there. Most of you no doubt have travelled on one of these before and got your own particular memories of the vehicles. And that's why I wanted to put these on the stream today. We've all seen a Mark 1. We've all got them on our layouts. If you're modelling anything from the 1950s to the current day, you've got to have a Mark 1 as part of your collection, whatever your scale. But not a lot of people actually know the ins and outs of them, when they came into service, what the full spec details of them are, how much more there is to know, why they carried certain liveries, where they operated. And if you do click that link in the description, I've put a link on there for you of all the Mark 1s we have available at the moment, covering all three of the major scales. Occasionally, we get some in some of the more unusual scales too, including the HO scale, so you can run them on a continental layout should you wish. And this isn't even the full Mark 1 story. I would be here for hours and hours and hours telling you the full tale. I've tried to give you a bit of a potted history today to really get you to have a look out there, really start looking into the Mark 1s. It's an absolutely fascinating story of how they came about and how they were developed. As you've mentioned, Northern Princess, there's the Mark 1 Pullmans too, where there was an offshoot of the design being made specifically for luxury rail travel. There was the Mark 1 postal units, there was Mark 1 electric multiple units, diesel multiple units, baggage cars, the whole lot. This really was a design that completely took over the UK railway scene in the 1950s. And that's why so many models have been made available as well. Various manufacturers, in fact, I think pretty much every one of the major UK manufacturers has had a go at their own model of the Mark 1 in various different years. And if me telling you for 15 minutes why these are a great coach, and even Richard there mentioning too that they're a great coach as well, if me and Richard can't convince you, then just look at the fact that there's so many models of a really high quality out there too. These are a pivotal part of the UK railway scene. There's so many different liveries, so many different variations and operations. If you want formations guides, you can start with small trains of 2 coaches up in the Scottish Highlands with maybe a Class 37 diesel locomotive. You can have a small branch line service in the 1950s with 1 or 2 vehicles too. And then you can go right through to the expresses. Pretty much every locomotive I've done a loco profile on so far has operated with Mark I coaches. So you've got some great ideas there if you want to check out some of the other videos. The toolings replicate the real life models. You've got the different bogie styles. You've got the different carriage styles covering the different uses of the vehicles, whether they are restaurant buffet cars, purely passenger vehicles, even examples that went into departmental use for testing the various railways across the UK. There isn't a place the Mark I hasn't gone. There isn't a job it hasn't done. And there isn't really a model out there that has been missed either, with so many different variations that you can get hold of. Do take a little bit of a look at the Mark I. It might not be as glamorous as a steam locomotive or your favourite diesel or electric vehicle, but they are just as interesting, if not more so. And coming up to their 70th year in operation now, which was far longer than they were ever expected to run. They've still got a lot of stories to tell. They're still the mainstay of preserved railways and charters across the UK, as we can see here up in Scotland, still in use, performing the duties. I don't think there'll be many coaches that last this long in service. Many of the more modern designs might not get to 70 years. And I still think we'll see the Mark I's running until their centenary as well. So if we're around in 2051, I'll make sure to do a second video with a follow-up celebrating 100 years of the Mark I. But what do you think? Do you think the Mark I's one of your favourite coaches? Do you think one of the other designs is better? Maybe one of the grouping designs or the later Mark II or Mark III vehicles? Do let us know in the comments. I'm always interested to know what you guys and girls think out there. Otherwise, as ever, make sure to click that link in the description. All the details on all the Mark I's we have available right now are in there. Thanks again for watching. It's been great to read some of your comments. Sorry I've not been able to respond to all of them live in the stream, but I'll certainly check them out after I go off air. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page for more rolling stock profiles, more model overviews, and some skills casts as well, where we can really teach you some of the skills of a great modeler. Make sure to check out the up and coming streams too, and check out our website for more news and the latest model railway information. Otherwise, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.